Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for CHSN. We are brought to you, as always, by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. With 𝗏cie 𝗰𝗶𝗟𝗀, I am Pat Boyle. It's been less than a week since the Blackhawks season is over. I guess it was a week ago today that it ended. Are you slowly getting into off-season mode, or does the Stanley Cup playoffs kind of have your juices flowing again?
Well, it was a weird time when the Hawks season ended because it was, for the first time in a long time, it was our normal Easter week. It coincided with normal, so I had a lot of late church services at night, and so now this week I'm finally able to decompress. What a slate of hockey on Monday night! That was easily the best day so far of the four playoff games that we've had so far, and so I feel like that night yesterday of slate where we had for the first time, I think all playoffs, it was 4 games on, and so that got me into the rest of the first round.
And a lot of former Blackhawks played major roles in those games on Monday night. We will get to that coming up a little bit later on in this podcast. I also have a story that I'll wait to tell next week about jury duty and how it relates to the Blackhawks and to this podcast.
What a tease.
Again, I will wait till next week to tell that story because I could be a juror tomorrow. So. But again, I digress. Let's get into the Blackhawks podcast here. And every year around this time, 𝗏cie, we go through the Blackhawks pending UFAs and restricted free agents and talk about whether we would re-sign them, bring them back, or let them go. This year, a much smaller list than usual. Let's start with the unrestricted free agents. And 𝗏𝗏𝗏 spent most of the year in Rockford. He dealt with a wrist injury there, played only 30 games for the Ice Hogs, had 27 points. I think the writing is certainly on the wall here. This is a thanks for coming, 𝗶𝗏, but look forward to greener pastures in some other NHL city.
Yeah, and I think he would probably say the same thing too. Would probably like an opportunity to play elsewhere in the NHL. He got relegated to the minors for the majority of the season, and so I do not think 𝗏𝗏 will be back.
And then the other one, it's the big one we've been talking about for the last several weeks, and that's Ryan Donato. Just turned 29, big 62-point career season in 80 games, 31 goals, 31 assists. Certainly genuine interest on both sides to keep this relationship going and extend Ryan Donato. And the thought was a contract at the trade deadline worth around $4 million times 3 years was on the table. Is that the deal you believe was there right around $4 million?
Yeah, I think it was like right under $4 million for a 3-year deal. And I think the longer this goes, the more it benefits the Blackhawks in some way, because I think the market value for Donato, I'm not sure exactly what number he's hoping to get. I don't know if he's hoping to get more term or if he's hoping to get that AAV to a higher number. I'm not sure, but I think the longer it goes, the more it's going to benefit the Blackhawks, because we saw towards the end of the season, all these younger players cracking the lineup, whether it was with Frank Nazar and Landon Slaggert and Oliver Moore, Ryan Green, like all these players were starting to move some of the veterans down the lineup. Like Nick Foligno had been playing basically a top 6 role for the Blackhawks all season long, maybe even, third line stuff here and there, but he got moved to the 4th line by the end of the year because all these young guys had kind of overtaken the top 9. And so I wonder if that's a scenario where the Blackhawks are like, we don't want to promise, or we don't want to sign Ryan Donato to a contract and make it be like a top 9 contract when he might get, he might get bumped to a bottom 6 role moving forward. So I still think it gets done. It's kind of weird though it hasn't gotten done, because I feel like both sides really like each other, and it's just trying to find that middle ground of whatever that looks like.
Okay, so I did a lot of just thinking about this situation prior to coming on the podcast, and when I say things like I'm hearing, that means I've heard intel from one side or the other, and then I bring it to the podcast. I'm not saying that here. This is a guesstimate from my standpoint. He's at the magic age of 29. Are you below 30 or above 30? So this deal is important because if it's 3 years, he's going to be around 32, 33, and he's in that zone of they get a lot of times it's 1 year deals for, just above $1 million. Now things are going to change probably with the salary cap, but in years past, the 33-year-old player tends to, get shorter term deals, and they tend to be just north of $1 million, say. So I'm guessing Donato's camp really wants a 4-year pact. They're okay with the 4 million or around that, but they are looking at something. They think somebody out on the unrestricted free agent market would offer him a 4-year deal. And there probably is a scenario where that could happen. Now, would they go 4 times 4, or would it be a little less to get that 4th year? I don't exactly know, but I think if I could guess that Donato's camp is leaning into the 4-year term, and Chicago, for the reasons you explained, they don't want to have a roadblock on their roster preventing a top 9 forward position to one of the players they currently have in the pipeline. Could even be a player they draft in this upcoming draft that would be making their debut in 3 years in the NHL. And, if you're locked into a 4th year, now, again, there's always ways to alleviate that. If you don't give a no trade, no movement clause or modified, you could move a player. And I think, you could always do that with a player of his ilk. But we're also forecasting for 4 years down the road what the Blackhawks prospect pool looks like, what the big league lineup looks like, and what is Donato's role in that. So if I had to guess, term is probably the sticking point here. And the longer this goes, the more I think obviously they would test the waters. And if they're willing to go to test the waters, that would make me think that they are hearing there is an appetite somewhere in the league that would give him what he is searching for.
Yeah. The challenge here with Donato is he's coming off a year where he shattered career highs with 31 goals and 62 points. His previous career high was 16 goals and 31 points. So he essentially doubled both totals. So this wasn't a season where Donato was, he's a 20 goal, 45 point producer on a consistent basis. These were significant leaps. And so the Hawks probably don't want to hand out this huge contract rewarding this past season, even though it would be well deserved. Donato just turned 30 years old, and he's not the fleetest of foot skating wise either. So you don't want to hand out this 4-year contract if you're the Blackhawks, and by 33 the Hawks want to, the Hawks have made it known that they want to build their teams based on speed, and obviously you need different types of players. You can't just have 12 guys that can skate and no guys and 0 players with no jam. But that is the challenge too. Like you're negotiating this contract for Donato on what he just did, but if water finds its level next year and he's closer to 15 goals and his 30 points, which was his previous career high, that would be a tough contract to swallow. If you're like, this is year 1 of 4, how are we gonna find a way to make this work down the road?
Yeah, and let me make the point. He just turned 30. I said he just turned 29. His birthday was at the beginning of April. I remember, it was one of the last games of the season. And so he is 30, which is, like we said, the magic number. And the next player we're going to talk about is a case point of why you don't want to maybe overreact to a career year, because is it the outlier or is it a predictor of things to come? As we take a look at the restricted free agent list, we begin with 𝗵𝗀 𝗂𝗂, who is 25, and he had 54 points in 75 games in the 2023-24 season. You'll recall he spent a lot of that time on Bedard's line, and you thought that, okay, coming off a 54-point campaign, would he be around the 54 mark? Would it be slightly north of that? I never saw a 14.51 game played season for 𝗵𝗀 𝗂𝗂. I'll just put it bluntly. What happened to 𝗂𝗂?
Yeah. Here's what I'll say about 𝗂𝗂. It started differently than it ended last year for him, meaning Hawks got to training camp and they make all these signings with Bertuzzi and 𝗏𝗏. Last year, 𝗂𝗂 was first line with Connor Bedard on the top power play unit. Well, the Hawks get to training camp and 𝗂𝗂 is not on the first line with Bedard. He's not on the first power play unit. And I think they tried him out at center to open the gate. So he was playing different position, not with the one guy that he played with most last year, and not on the top power play unit where offensive players like him tend to get their confidence. And so he kind of had a little bit of an uphill battle to start. Having said that, the Hawks gave him an opportunity to run with the second line center position because he was the guy that started it out. And unfortunately, he didn't take control of it. And things kind of just spiraled and really never got on the train tracks for him. And honestly, I think it's a real testament to how incredible the rookie season of Connor Bedard was last year to put up those numbers with a player that turns out couldn't even crack the 12-man forward group on a nightly basis for Chicago this year. And so I don't think Kurashev is going to be back. He is, I think he's arbitration eligible as well again, which he doesn't really have much of a case this time around. I know last year the previous time he did with the 2-year deal, but I don't expect 𝗵𝗀 𝗂𝗂 to be back, and hopefully he lands on his feet in an organization where he can play more of the role that he's used to playing.
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's a comp to the Dylan Strome thing, but it's one of those where, you can have a good fit and then you kind of fall out of favor, whether it's the coaching staff or do you think any of it is, we talk about the forwards and on the back end, we talk about speed a lot. Do you think his foot speed maybe didn't mesh with what we've seen of the new forwards that have emerged from the Blackhawks prospect pool?
Yeah, I see that. Like, I saw that the work ethic was there with 𝗂𝗂 this year, but I just didn't see that translate into him flying through the neutral zone the way that he did last year. And then 𝗂𝗂 is a player too, where if he's not producing offensively, what other ways does he impact the game? And I can't really think of it. I know they've tried him out on the penalty kill in the past, but that was not a role that he was playing with Chicago. And so I think when the offensive production wasn't there, the rest of his game didn't complement the rest of the forward group.
So I think we're in agreement that 𝗂𝗂 will not be back with the Blackhawks next season. I don't think that would be a surprise to anybody, considering his role with the team this past year, how many times he was a healthy scratch. Let's move to the back end and let's go to Wyatt Kaiser, lefty D, who turns 23 in July. Played 57 games with the Hawks, 4 goals, 4 assists. He was not a minus player. Yeah, plus minus was 0, which I think is important when you look at this type of defenseman. When he came up in March after another stint in Rockford. I think he ended up with playing 17 games for Rockford. In that month of March, I saw a different player. He had 3 goals and 2 assists in March. And Charlie, he just looked like he belonged. And it was at a time that you and I have talked about where there was a change in the room, where the young guys that came up from Rockford were not just looked at as ice hogs that were there for a stint. It was becoming the young guys' room, and it changed with, Nazar coming up in December, and it slowly gathered steam as 𝗩𝗏 joined the team and others. And I just thought Wyatt was one of those young guys whose voice got a little bit louder, felt a little more at home, not only off the ice, but he looked at home on it.
Yeah, because he was probably looking around the locker room and he's like, oh, I'm one of the veterans on the D now, which in a weird way, because a lot of these younger players like 𝗩𝗏 and 𝗏𝗏 and 𝗵𝗀 or whatever. So Wyatt Kaiser was one of the strongest defensemen down the stretch for Chicago. Like, he was one of their most consistent, most reliable. They're going to bring him back. Like, I think they're going to give him a qualifying offer for sure. The challenge for me moving forward about trying to look long-term on whether Kaiser is going to be a long-term piece for the Blackhawks is he's more of an undersized defenseman at 6 feet. And you look at some of the defensemen that Chicago is accumulating, Artem 𝗩𝗏, Sam Rinzel, Alex Vlasic, it's 6'7", 6'6", 6'4". Ethan Del Mastro is 6'4". It's these big defensemen. Sam Rinzel, 6'5". And so Kaiser goes against the grain of what Chicago is hoping to accomplish on the back end, but he plays a physical brand of hockey that he's not like this puck moving guy that can't battle in front of the net. Like, he's physical. I think it's just the size aspect that is going against him. But the last month and a half or so of the season, I thought he was one of the most consistent defensemen that Chicago had going.
Yeah, and at his size, again, I don't think he's undersized, but you compare it to the Del Mastros and the Creviers and the Vlasics. But there's also the point, do big guys play big? And does he at 6 foot, 195, does he play bigger than his size indicates? And I think he does, as you alluded to. And I think that bodes well for him in a D group that I think, as we talk about even 𝗠cie 𝗰𝗶𝗹, like, you need to play a physical brand of hockey as well and get used to clearing the front of the net and tying up sticks and using your body to the best of your ability as an advantage over the opponent. And I like a lot about what Wyatt brings to the table. I like his approach to the game. At one point in March, when he was having that good run, we just had a casual conversation at his stall, and he was basically like, I'm finally not thinking too much. I felt like every time he came up, he had a couple of notes that he was getting from various coaches and whatnot, and he was out there and he was thinking too much. In March, when he came up, he just played, and it was less thinking, more reaction, and I think you saw the results of that. So I think we're in agreement with Kaiser that you will make him an offer and try to come to terms with him as a restricted free agent.
Something to keep note of. Sorry, Pat, really quick, is I believe Kaiser next year will no longer be eligible to go to the minors without needing waivers. And so that's just it's kind of a wrinkle to add into next year, knowing that if the Hawks give him a qualifying offer and he's back, I believe the Blackhawks, he has to be on the NHL roster. And if he's not, he would have to go through waivers to be sent to Rockford.
Well, that's an interesting point that you have to factor into this equation. Especially when you have this surplus on the back end.
Right.
𝗠cie 𝗰𝗶𝗹, he'll turn 24 next month. He already talked about his size, 6'8", 230. When he and Vlasic were paired together, the twin tower combination. I like what I see from Crevier. I think I'd like to see him up the physicality and try to, not only just be big but play big. And I think that will come as he gets accustomed to playing in the National Hockey League, and and his frame continues to fill out.
Yeah, he's one of the bigger defensemen that the Blackhawks have that is more one-dimensional. Like, he's defensive-minded, doesn't really add much offense to his game. You look at 𝗦𝗏, he's a two-way guy, big, 6'6", physical, but he can also skate. With Crevier, you know that he's more of a shutdown type defenseman, and he's not going to contribute much offensively. And so what that looks like for him is making sure that he's using his frame. He's a respectable skater for his size,
yes,
but using his size and his physicality to bring out the best in his game. Like, if he wants to be a consistent piece on this Blackhawks team. And so, credit to him too, though. Being a 7th round pick and already kind of establishing a couple seasons in the NHL, he's already probably come a long way. Like, if you look at maybe some of the other 7th round or 6th round picks in that draft class, I'm not even sure if any of them have sniffed the NHL. And so it's a testament to Crevier that he's even got here. But with the surplus of defensemen that the Blackhawks have coming, he's really going to have to make an impression moving forward to solidify himself as part of the roster, whether it's a 6-7 defenseman moving forward. I think they'll give him a qualifying offer to be back. I think he falls short 4 games. I think it's 4 games of being waiver eligible for next year. So
that's big too. Big too. You're not, so to speak, if he's a tweener, if he's a 6-7D or a 6-7-8D, and you want to give somebody an opportunity from Rockford to come up and you want to send him down, unlike the Kaiser situation, he would have to go through waivers. It looks like Crevier would not, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
That's huge.
Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but okay. I believe I'm interpreting it correctly. And so that definitely favors Crevier, where he can go down to the minors and stay with the organization if there became a point where he got squeezed out. He can still have a potential role down in the minors.
Okay, let's talk about another position that has become a surplus because of the trade in March and the acquisition of Spencer Knight. So Spencer Knight has 1 year left on his deal after this season at $4.5 million. You got Laurent Brossoit. He's got 1 year left. We're still up in the air on that. Ďurčo Meso has 1 year left on his entry-level deal. And Arvid Soderblom is a restricted free agent. And, he was one of the surprises of the season when you look at the totality of his work. He was supposed to be in Rockford with Brossoit's knee injury and the subsequent second surgery and not being available. He played, obviously, all season long. And, he hits a rough patch post 4 Nations like Mrazek did. And even prior to that, around the Winter Classic in January, late January. Where do you stand? I think we both think he's a very solid backup and at times looked really, really strong. And I thought he finished the season on an up note after kind of wavering a bit over the last month plus.
Yeah, he was definitely one of the better bounce back performances on the Blackhawks this season relative to last year, where, boy, he just couldn't get anything going after that early start to the season, where his best start was probably in Toronto on the opening road trip of the year, and just could never quite get back to that level. And I think with goaltenders, they're so hit or miss as far as you don't know what you're going to get from 1 year to the next, because 1 year it was basically 2 opposite sides of the spectrum. Like last year, it went really poorly for Soderblom, and this year it went very well for Soderblom. And so the interesting part about this is we both expect Soderblom to be back, But what does that contract look like? Because he's eligible for arbitration. So I don't know if that favors the goaltender or if it favors the Blackhawks, where they have last year's sample size to go off of. I feel like in some level it probably benefits Soderblom that he's arbitration eligible, because I think he has a stronger case. Some of his numbers last year weren't as terrible in the first month or two of the season. He just wasn't getting the wins. And so I think moving forward, a 1-2 tandem of Knight and Soderblom is a pretty respectable tandem as far as young goaltenders go. Like, I think of the way that Toronto has handled Anthony Stolarz and Joseph Woll, where that's just like 1-2. They basically just split starts down the middle, or the Washington Capitals with Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren. It just feels like teams are trending in that direction. I think we're going to see more of a Knight carry the bulk of the load, like 55 starts ish, I think, with Spencer Knight. And I think if Soderblom was able to handle the other 35-ish, whatever range that it starts, I think that's a pretty respectable split between those two. And so it's just going to be interesting to see what that next contract looks like for Soderblom.
Yeah. Do you think with 1 year left on his deal that we could be looking at an extension to Spencer Knight this summer?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I haven't even thought about that, and I didn't even think to ask him that in the exit interviews.
I'll be honest. I think an extension for Spencer Knight, and basing it on his workload that he had here, and not that much in Florida, would be advantageous to the Blackhawks as far as extending him now instead of waiting till he plays 55 games or so next season for the Blackhawks.
Yeah, the Hawks, it would be beneficial for the Blackhawks to want to get an extension done this summer, because if they feel like he's a bona fide number one starting goaltender, they can probably get him at a pretty respectable cap hit moving forward. If you're Spencer Knight, you probably want to wait just to see, if you want to cash out on a bigger deal, that just starting a full season, having a starters type workload will probably get you in the upper, or like whatever tier that would graduate himself to. And so if you're the Blackhawks, I think you're absolutely going to be open to discussing what that extension could look like. If you're Spencer Knight, though, he might want to wait to see how it plays out. Or, I don't know, like we haven't been around Spencer Knight enough to know like what he could be thinking as far as business related decisions. But maybe for him, he's thinking, I would like some security, and I know I'm going to be a long-term starting goalie here. So maybe there's no motive for him to want to max out a potential dollar amount.
We do know he's looking for a place. And,
we do.
And he's turning every key and every stone. He's not leaving any unturned as he searches for the perfect place to make his home here in Chicago. Another little caveat I want to throw to this: since Spencer Knight was acquired, it just so happens that one 𝗵𝗀 has been playing fantastically for the Rockford IceHogs, and good luck to the IceHogs. They'll take on the Chicago Wolves beginning Wednesday, right?
Yep, 3-game series.
So let's say 𝗵𝗀 has a really nice postseason with Rockford in the Calder Cup playoffs. The game plan may be, they may say like, all right, well, we're going to obviously offer Arvid Soderblom a contract and bring him back. But like in our grand plan, it's extending Knight this summer, and probably, if not next year, the year after, having 𝗵𝗀, if they think 𝗵𝗀's ceiling is higher than Soderblom, having that be the tandem of Spencer Knight and Drew 𝗵𝗀. I mean, this is a good problem to have. Young players competing within your organization for playing time, and ultimately how they're going to stack up when a championship window opens up. So I think this is a huge postseason for 𝗵𝗀. He's done nothing but say the right things, because it had to be a bit of a blow to his ego, when Knight came aboard, because all of a sudden it went from Arvid Soderblom and really him as the future of the Blackhawks. And then it changed on a dime that Spencer Knight became the future, at least on paper. And where did he fit into the equation? Now, he and Spencer spent time together in the U.S. Development program. They're good friends, and they have a good relationship. So that's also kind of a nice thing to know as you're trying to plot a year or two down the road. Like, how will Drew handle being, the 1B to Spencer, and how will he handle not getting the 55 type game workload? And to know that they have a good working relationship already and are friends is got to be comforting to the Blackhawks as they try to forecast their goaltending situation.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have now if you're Chicago, because if the Blackhawks feel like they have their number one starter with Spencer Knight, it becomes less stressful for, at least organizationally, who could fill that 1B spot versus when they didn't have Spencer Knight. It was, are they sold on Soderblom being the number one? Are they sold on 𝗵𝗀 Are they sold on Adam Gajan, who still, hasn't graduated to the professional hockey yet? So now it just slots all of these goaltenders in their proper place, where if you're Soderblom, if you're 𝗵𝗀, all you have to do is play yourself into a 1B situation to kind of get on Chicago's radar to be in the NHL, versus is he performing to the level that the Blackhawks feel comfortable with, where he can be the long-term starter? I'm not sure, because that just takes so much time for NHL teams to figure out. And goaltenders then typically take a very long time to develop. And so I think if you're the Blackhawks organization, you're going to 𝗵𝗀 this summer whenever the AHL playoffs end, or the Calder Cup playoffs end, and you're saying, hey, you're going to come to training camp and you're going to compete for a roster spot, but the likelihood of you starting in Rockford is probably that's where he's probably going to start. We want to see what you did the second half of the season over the course of a long haul to prove to us that you can handle even a starter's type workload in professional hockey, but perform well enough that we have confidence in you to be a potential 1B situation if it got to that level in a couple of years.
All right, let's get to the Stanley Cup playoffs. They have been really, really good. They ratcheted up a notch on Monday night. Let's start in the West, where the Jets and the Blues have been going at it. This has been probably the most competitive series so far. They've been tight games. The Jets are up 2-0 in the series. A ton of thumping in this series, and the Jets took the stranglehold on the series with a 2-1 victory on Monday night.
Yeah, this has definitely been the tightest series. Having said that, if you're St. Louis, that's got to be really demoralizing that they find themselves down 2-0, because I felt like game one, Connor Hellebuyck looked a little shaky.
Yep.
If you go back and look at all three of the St. Louis Blues goals in game one, I don't know if this is a tendency of Connor Hellebuyck's, but I noticed it because it was a theme. Okay, one, he plays deep in his crease, which is not, it's abnormal from other goaltenders, but for him, he likes to play deep in his crease. What I noticed though is every time the shooter would wind up to shoot, Hellebuyck retreated back on his skates. He didn't press forward, like he wasn't attacking the shooter. And so I don't know if that was like a nervous tendency of his. I thought he looked a little bit more stable in game two. But Winnipeg, the reason I picked them is because even outside of Connor Hellebuyck, they are still a very good team in front of him. And I think if you're St. Louis, it's got to be a little demoralizing knowing they didn't come away with a victory in Winnipeg in either of the two games, because I thought they probably deserved at least one.
Yeah, and the Blues have done a nice job, as you would expect from a Montgomery coach team, of trying to get in Hellebuyck's kitchen and make life difficult. They've done a really nice job screening and trying to get second and third opportunities on Hellebuyck. So that series shifts to St. Louis. They're down 2-0 in that one. Dallas and Colorado. What a game on Monday night. Colin Blackwell, the former Blackhawk, the overtime GWG, in an absolute must-win for Dallas. They can't lose the first two games of this series at home and think they're going to go to Colorado and get back in this series. And I just love the Colin Blackwell story because, as we talked about it last year, he thought his NHL career was on the line. He was dealing with a difficult injury, wasn't feeling himself, was trying to, crack the Blackhawks lineup. And I remember it was right around the mom's trip at the beginning of this season. He was still just trying to find his way. He didn't even know if he was going to be able to go on that trip with his mom. And he made he was one of those spark plugs when he got into the lineup for the Blackhawks. The way he played, I want to kind of say kind of the way Donato played a lot. And we also mentioned how Slaggert played when he came from Notre Dame and joined the Blackhawks. It was just a different grittiness and toughness that at the time Luke was really looking for. And Colin parlayed making the most out of limited touches with the Blackhawks to sign with one of the better teams, in the National Hockey League in Dallas, and, find a role. Like, I think he was a healthy scratch in game one.
Yep.
He's a fourth line guy, but trying to make the most of it. And I really appreciate it when the backstory of how close he was to thinking that his NHL career was done, to all of a sudden he's being interviewed by Scott Van Pelt because he just had the game winner on ESPN of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yeah, he's such an easy guy to root for. And obviously when he was here in Chicago, we had a front row seat of the mental toll that it took on him to deal with that injury and try to overcome it. And I remember when he first was talking to us and opening up about it, he was getting emotional because he was just wrestling with his hockey future. And so when I saw that goal go in, I was my objectivity went out the window because I was so happy for the player himself, knowing the human of Colin Blackwell, and just for him to have that moment was awesome. And it was a must-win game for the Dallas Stars, like you mentioned. And so for him to be a healthy scratch in game one, I think Blackwell had said after the game that he feels like his style of hockey is better in the playoffs. And I can't agree more with him because he plays 100 miles an hour, and it's hard to do that in the regular season.
Doesn't give up, works hard below the goal line, just does the things that you need at this time of the year. And I totally agree that his style of play is more Stanley Cup playoff-esque than it is regular season-esque.
Right. That was an entertaining overtime too, by the way. There were very few whistles. Side note, Mikko Rantanen has kind of been invisible the first two games. What's going on here?
Well, he doesn't have Nathan MacKinnon. And, we kind of saw that in his limited time in Carolina of life without Nate. And then, I don't know if it's the pressure or what, but what do you make of what you've seen from Rantanen so far?
What I make about it and what I've put together over the last couple of months, he's a very good wingman. He's not a good Batman. Right now, he's got to be the Batman for the Dallas Stars. He had to be the Batman for the Carolina Hurricanes, and he's just not that.
He's a good wingman. He's not a driver of offense necessarily.
Exactly. He's not going to drive your line, but if you have a Batman to go with him, he is an extremely unbelievable. He's still a superstar in the NHL, but he's not on the level of McKinnon, McDavid, where he can take over a game by himself. And so that's what Dallas, I think, is figuring out too.
As if this series needed more juice when it comes to storylines, do we see Gabe Landeskog make his debut, his first game in 3 years in game 3?
I do think so. I think it was all part of the plan for him not to play in game 2 because it that came across to me like he was operating like he was playing. But we've seen the Hawks do this occasionally for some of the injured guys. I think it was actually 𝗵𝗀 that used to do this, where he's like, I liked to get the player in to simulate the routine of acting like he was playing again. And so he would participate in warmups, do all these things, but not play. I expect Landeskog to be in the lineup for Game 3.
Let's move on to Vegas and Minnesota. Golden Knights up 1-0 in that series. Just wash, rinse, repeat for Vegas. They're just a professional team that seems to be ready at this time of the year. And I'm really impressed, with the player that Jack Eichel has become. And I'm not saying he's anywhere exactly like a stylistic comparison to Connor Bedard, but I want people to look at Eichel's numbers when he started. They're very Bedard-esque, in the same type of point range, in the same type number of games, and just how he's evolved into being a top 5 player in this league, or certainly a top 10 player in this league, and how 98 is well on his way of having a very, very excellent career in the National Hockey League when he's in a company with guys like Eichel.
Yeah, I thought Jack Eichel was going to be a player that was very, very good in the regular season, but in the playoffs, I'm not sure how his game was going to translate. But boy, he's been awesome in the playoff, like in his playoff career with Vegas specifically, to the point where I have no concerns about him, and he's a bona fide number 1 centerman, and so he's been great. Vegas, they're kind of ho-hum. I texted you this, but how about that pass from Kaprizov to Matt Boldy? That was a thing of beauty that I had to replay a couple times, because like in real time, I was like, wow, that was unbelievable pass. And then you saw the replay, and it was so intentional. It wasn't even luck. Like that's exactly what he was aiming for. And that was a thing of beauty.
And this time of year, those east-west passes, getting these great goaltenders to move left to right in this instance, it creates all the opportunity you need to beat them. And it was just a fantastic setup. And Minnesota's going to battle in this one. I'm absolutely certain, but we both picked Vegas to win that series. I picked the Kings to upset the Oilers. You did go Oilers, right?
I went the Kings too.
Oh, you went the Kings as well. So
yep.
We both were feeling that having that home ice advantage, how successful they've been, how they were trending into the playoffs, and how the Oilers were not. LA jumps out to a 4-0 lead in game 1, and it ends up getting tied up by McDavid at 5-all. And you're thinking like, okay, this is where the defending Western Conference champs find their mojo and find a way to pull one out, that they were down 4-0. And who scores the game winner? Former Blackhawk Phillip Danault on a flubbed shot that end over end was like a changeup, and ends up being the game winner right after McDavid had got the equalizer.
Yeah, and it was the second of the game. And 𝗪𝗀 𝗵𝗏 and Phillip Danault, like their responsibilities are to shut down Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. But if Phillip Danault is going to chip in with a couple goals a game moving forward, I mean, that I didn't have that on my radar. I think that is first of all, Connor McDavid is such a joy to watch. I mean, 4 points, that was probably one of his best games that we've seen all season long, and the stakes were at its highest. There was a point, I think it was like 8 minutes left in the second period, where Edmonton had like 9 shots on goal. Like they just could not get anything generated against the LA Kings. And my fear, if you're an Edmonton Oilers fan, is I'm not sure how many games in this series that they're going to be able to put up a 5 spot against that LA team, and to not come away with a victory probably has to sting very badly right now.
Let's move to the East. The Battle of Ontario. Leafs up 1-0 in that series. We'll see game 2 tonight. Toronto won the opener 6-2. The Stars were the Stars. And if I hear one more time people questioning Mitch Marner and whether or not he can play in the postseason, I'll put Exhibit A as game 1, a goal and 2 assists. I think I saw the graphic. He has now scored on his last 3 breakaways. Frankie Nazar, study what he does, and you too will follow in Mitch's shoes.
That was it's funny because when we did this playoff preview podcast in the last episode, I said this was going to be a very low scoring series, and we got a high scoring one out of game 1, right out of the gates. It was very high scoring. I still don't expect that moving forward, but that was a professional, encouraging win by the Maple Leafs where their stars led the way. They got good goaltending from Anthony Stolarz. He wasn't on the ice yesterday for practice, but he is this morning, so that's a positive sign. But that was got chippy at the end of the game. Did you see Garrett Rank, the official, have like he basically had a notebook to read off all the penalties at the end? That was hilarious. But I expect a much tighter game in game 2. I think Ottawa is going to flex their muscles and make it more of a defensive game in game 2.
Finally, we're going to see the Battle of the Sunshine State kick off Tuesday night. What a weird situation that is. Some of these series are already 2 games in, and Florida and Tampa are dropping the puck for game 1. We both like Tampa in this series.
Yeah, and I think Matthew Tkachuk is a game-time decision, but because this series doesn't start until today, that probably benefits the defending Stanley Cup champions because they're dealing with so many injuries. So I still like Tampa, but I'm going to be excited to see what the tone of this series is because I don't know who's healthy and who's X% healthy or who's just out there trying to survive. It really comes down to Matthew Tkachuk's, what percent is he at? But very much looking forward to this battle of Florida teams.
Be interesting to watch how Seth Jones plays in this series as well. You know, he has not been in the postseason in a while, and they're going to ask a lot of him with Ekblad out of the lineup. Let's move to Washington and Montreal. It got going last night in the nation's capital. Alex Ovechkin, so much for the scoring leader slump after setting the record and passing Wayne Gretzky with 895. 2 goals, including his first ever overtime goal in the postseason. And Anthony Beauvillier, as we continue the theme of former Blackhawks, Beauvillier, a goal on the Ovechkin line.
So I saw a stat earlier, I think it was last night. Anthony Beauvillier is now the first player in NHL history to assist on a goal for Alex Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby in the same year. So that's a little fun fact. Anthony Beauvillier seemingly always scores big-time goals in the playoffs. But this was your upset pick. You had the Canadiens. I'm sure that stung because if Montreal wins that game, the momentum certainly tilts in their favor because it would have been a comeback victory for them. But Washington flexed their muscles. I was not expecting Logan Thompson to be ready for game 1, and he was. And so that was a massive development that I didn't see coming. And so the Capitals getting out to a 1-0 lead, obviously great for them. But I think Montreal put some belief in themselves that they can come back from any score in this series. And I wouldn't be surprised if they made things interesting in game 2.
Carolina, New Jersey, Canes lead 1-0 in that series. That one feels like a sweep or a 5-gamer max.
Yeah, and the tough thing about New Jersey today going into game 2 is Luke Hughes and Brendan Dillon will not be playing for New Jersey. So it just feels like the hits keep coming for the Devils, and it's just going to be too much to overcome because Carolina is a really well-oiled machine, especially on home ice.
All right. I want to talk a little bit as we get ready to exit this podcast about ESPN's coverage of the Stanley Cup playoffs so far. Now, look, being in the business, it's not exactly like we're living in a glass house over here with a perfect broadcast each and every night. But when you are the rights holder and you share it with TNT, and I watch all their coverage throughout the regular season, it's just not been sharp. And from audio to like last night, hearing Dave Jackson talking in the background, to Kevin Weeks talking over Dave Jackson, to the forced shtick in the studio. Like, the beauty of TNT is, it kind of comes organically. Now, I know it doesn't always come organically. They do have graphics and things to support some of the stuff that Biz does. And when Shaq makes his appearance, and Charles Barkley makes his appearances, and even Shaq. And it kind of just feels like it's meant to happen. Where I love Steve Levy, friend of mine. The Levy Lounge has been a staple in sports centers with him and Barry Melrose for years. The whole thing of allowing Messier in, but not allowing PK Subban across the velvet rope. It's like, come on. These playoffs are so good. The beauty of the Stanley Cup playoffs is you just need to have the cameras, the audio, and call the action, and the rest of it will do itself. It'll just work. The games are fantastic. They create the drama. They create the storylines. You don't need to force it with shtick that comes off a little wonky.
Yeah, the one question I've had in the playoffs so far is, on both networks, the audio sounds weird as far as it drowns out the crowd noise. Like, I'm not sure why. Like, I was watching the Winnipeg game. It was game 1, and I'm like, if you put on Sportsnet's feed, you hear, you feel like you're in the building. When we were watching on our end in the States, it felt like it was so drowned out that you could barely feel the energy that was going on in the building. So that would be my one thing, is like, man, I want to hear more of the crowd and less of the announcer's voice. Like, try to find some sort of sweet spot, because I like to feel the energy when I'm watching these playoff games.
All right, you got anything else before we exit?
I don't think so. I'm good.
All right.
Well,
okay.
we'll save your great story for next episode.
Well, I don't know if it's great, but
it's funny.
Something. It's jury duty.
It's funny.
All right, so that's going to do it. This trial is over of the Blackhawks Breakaway podcast for CHSN. For Charlie Roumeliotis, I am Pat Boyle. We will catch you next time.